Welcome to the Flute 360 podcast, where we incorporate a panoramic view of flute-related topics. I am your host, Heidi K. Begay, and this is episode 93, Mind-Body Integration Techniques to Help Relieve Performance Anxiety, Part 2. Today's sponsor is brought to you by J&K Productions. Did you know that not only are they a production company for podcasts, but they are a recording company for musicians? Any musical recording needs that you may have, J&K Productions can fulfill that need. They have all the necessary equipment and expertise to record your next flute recording for college or graduate auditions, competitions, summer festivals, or a flute album. J&K Productions can record any setup imaginable, from solo flute, small chamber, flute and piano, and much more. Consider J&K Productions for your next recording project. Contact them at jkproductions.media. Today's discussion is a continuation from episode 92 with Chris Neal. Please check out episode 92 before diving into today's content. Thanks. I won't go down a rabbit hole here, but just a comment that I want to put out there. And the more I think about this and just our conversation, it's really making it real for me. Just this notion of us educators have such a huge responsibility with our students. And not just, their development of their musical skills, but who they are as individuals. Like, we're taking on such a huge role in their lives. And I just want to throw that out there because it's becoming more apparent to me the older I'm getting and the more experience I'm getting as a teacher. I kind of sometimes, I've had amazing teachers in my life. The more I'm a teacher and the more mature I'm getting to be, slowly but surely every day, getting to be the teacher that I want to be and continue to grow, the more I realize, wow, those teachers in my past have really shaped me in some really great ways. I don't know. I think I just need to throw that out there because just talking about helping the musical growth of a child is important, yes, but it's so much more than that.
Oh, I think you're right. In therapy space, the way that I work, we talk about this concept called transference, which is the basic idea is that clients will bring in emotional things that they really feel towards other people, and they will direct those at you. And the way that I work, that's actually where the therapy begins, is when I have a client who brings in, say, resentments towards a parent. And it doesn't matter if they're older or younger than me, or I'm the same gender as that parent or not. It matters not. So I could have, an 80-year-old man who comes in, and if he projects his resentments towards his mother onto me as his therapist, then that is the point where therapy begins, because then we engage that, we create a transformative experience for that person. I begin to, I have the opportunity, if I'm able, to create trust and to create a new experience for that person in that interaction. I've given a lot of thought to this and actually was bouncing this off a colleague who's an orchestral conductor recently. He thought it was kind of neat, and I think I might do some writing on this when I have the chance, that I think that there is definitely a transference that occurs in the student-teacher relationship, whether it's in the studio or the classroom. I think students come to that relationship needing something from you and asking you to negotiate with them about what that will be. And it's unique for every student. And Heidi, if I had a nickel for every time I screwed that up over the course of my career, every time I got it completely wrong, I'd have a lot of money right now. I could retire. But so I think there's two things that are important to realize. Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think students come to us needing things from us. And, we've had some students who come in and they just want to know what they did wrong so that they can go fix it. And we have other students who come in and they want to talk about their lives. They want to talk, and sometimes in some ways they are asking you to negotiate with them some kind of a relationship that goes beyond just, you played this note wrong, you played this rhythm wrong. They are asking us for inspiration. They are asking us for support. And I think they're asking us for safety. And it's on us, I think, as important people in their lives to try to respect that and understand that as much as we can. Again, I've gotten that wrong so many times in my lifetime. And so I think the parallel track there is if you're a teacher who is aware of these things and you think back to all the ways you got it wrong, I think it's incumbent on us as teachers to learn how to have self-compassion and learn how to respect the journey that we are on as teachers as well, because it's not just the students who are improving in that relationship.
Yeah. And I guess my disclaimer is it's not that at all like pointing the finger and saying like, oh, that was not a good experience for me, shame on you. It's, I wouldn't change it for the world. I think the experiences that I have had as a student in my musical studies has made me the teacher that I'm always striving to be, you know what I mean? Or the idea of this teacher that I want to be for my students, because 10 years ago when I first started teaching, it's not the same teacher that I am today. So it's, this work in progress. So
I think I see where you're coming from. And I guess what I would add to that is that just as oftentimes in therapy, part of our work is learning to make peace with past relational failures that have happened with important people in our lives. I think part of growing as a musician and as a teacher ourselves is really learning to view those previous relationships we've had with teachers with nuance. And, we've learned from those relationships. And much as we may have teachers that we've learned what we would want to emulate, I think we can also carry with us things that, we felt like teachers were not able to meet us where we needed. And we learn from that too. And we try to do better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the funny thing is when I was putting this series together, with these different topics of mindfulness and performance anxiety and et cetera, with experts in the field, I thought, and I had a chuckle and I told my husband, I'm like, oh man, this is going to be a time for me, because designing questions and talking about these topics, it's so hard because I am an educator, a flutist, and here I am a podcast host, but it's so hard to not bring my own personal experiences into something like this and to like divide it. You know what I mean? I'm like, and so I told my husband, I'm like, oh man, here I go. Like, I could easily just be very black and white and say, here are the questions. Let's stick to, the script. But it's so, maybe I wear my emotions too much on my sleeve or I just like to share. I do like to share and I like to meet people where they're at and hopefully somebody can relate to this. But I just feel like I need to say out loud that it was hard to not have my own experiences come through these topics because they get personal. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, they really do. And Heidi, I don't think there's any reason why they shouldn't come through. I think that's what makes your message important and unique is your own experience filtered through these concepts, whether it's on your podcast or with your students. I mean, students chose you as their teacher for a reason, and you bring some very specific things to them that they'll carry with them for a lifetime. And they can't get that from anyone else. And so, I think there's a reason people are drawn together. I think there's an energy that people find together. And when they're inspired by that, even if we don't really understand what that's coming from in the other person, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. As obviously all things in balance, right? But no, I think that, you are important to your students for some very particular reasons. And it's funny, something my colleagues in the cognitive behavioral world like to remind people is that what other people think about you is none of your business. And I think as teachers sometimes, we can sometimes not really understand how we're touching our students or not have a full appreciation for ways that we are reaching our students in important ways that we just don't even know about. And so I think we just have to, have integrity and trust the process and move forward from there and hope for the best.
Thank you for that. So you'd like to tell us some approaches that we can do to integrate mind and body experiences or techniques to help with performance anxiety. Can we dive into that?
Absolutely. So there are a few things that I think people do a lot to overcome performance anxiety. And this is sort of lessons in what not to do. The first thing they do is suffer. And as the saying goes, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And so I would say, first of all, that if you feel like something about your thoughts, feelings, or physical experience is impeding your performance, then it is. And you don't have to suffer in silence. There are ways to address that. A lot of people, I say a lot, one of the go-to ways is people will use substances like alcohol to kind of calm themselves down. And, all of these are very personal choices. I think you got to decide what's best for you and your own personal health. I think ideally what we do is we find a way to put ourselves at the top of that performance curve. And however that works for one individual, I think is what we need to do. And so I think it's a deeply personal and unique process that each of us goes through to get into that optimal performance zone. So one of the things that a lot of people use is a medicine, a class of drug called a beta blocker. And Heidi, have you known people that have used those?
Yes.
And what have you heard from them about use of those?
Yeah, so I have a string player friend who has mentioned that he or she feels like they could play in front of Yo-Yo Ma and not give a lick. Like not even worry if, they make a mistake by accident or if he was even in the room. All of their physical symptoms, they say, like the sweaty hands and the dry mouth or whatever, just go away because of it. And they make it seem a little too good to be true because it's like, oh, like, aren't there? I mean, there are always symptoms of taking medication, So yeah, that's one experience that I've had with a string player friend who's mentioned that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you hear any people who say they've tried it and it's not for them?
Not really. Actually, it's either,
okay.
I don't think this conversation like with colleagues of mine really come up because it's almost taboo. Like you don't want to say right. that you're taking it because you don't want others to think, well, that's not fair. Or, well, it's really not fair to be in a situation where you're considering taking beta blockers, but where they think it's like a magic drug, like, oh, well, you're taking this pill to like help with everything. But like you said, there could be some cases where, it actually doesn't really help at all.
Well, right. I think there is, people can get judgy about that sort of thing. And I think people who take medications, whether it's for, beta blockers for performance anxiety or just, medications in support of your own mental health, there still is a stigma. Mm-hmm. And naturally, I hope that we can normalize that struggle and reduce the stigma so that people can actually get the help that they need. So I hear mixed reviews on beta blockers, and I'm not a medical doctor. I am not qualified to give somebody advice on whether to take a prescription medication or not. So I'm not going to do that, but I will say a couple things about beta blockers. They're often in medical circles prescribed as blood pressure medication. And people will ask me, because I do a lot of brainwave work, they'll say, well, so beta blockers, does that mean they do something with beta waves, which in the brain, and if we talk about flow, I think on the next show, we're going to talk about flow a little bit. We'll talk a little about brain waves. And no, but beta blockers aren't, the title doesn't really have anything to do with beta waves, although beta waves are important for us when we understand flow as a musician. They are beta androgen inhibitors in the body, or put another way, they reduce adrenaline, is the basic thing. Now, if someone's a pre-med major and you're screaming, no, that's not right. Well, that's fine. Send me an email. We'll talk about it. But that's kind of the basic gist is it lowers epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline in the body. And I don't know if it lowers the levels or lowers the effect, but either way, what it does is it kind of lowers the arousal ceiling for us.
Okay.
And so if you tend to get hyper aroused and those medications bring you into a zone where you're not hyper aroused and you're able to get into that middle of the performance bell curve, then maybe that's a good choice for someone. What I hear from other performers is that, yes, it knocks the edge off, but they also feel like they're not really able to give the inspired performances that they want to give. And when you think about the effect that that drug actually has on the mind and body, it makes sense, because if it puts a ceiling on your potential for an arousal state, then it means that, when we get to that, ultimate moment in Mahler 1, where, the horns are going crazy and the strings are sawing away and everyone gets excited, right? If we have a ceiling there that we can't push through and to go into that musical moment with everyone, then we're kind of stuck. And so what does that mean for someone? Well, I can't tell someone what to do. Maybe there are conversations they can have with their medical provider about dosage or whatever. Again, that's not my area. But a lot of times people find me because they actually want to not take more medicine. And so I think my orientation, my bias is to try to find other ways to try to, whether we're talking about performance anxiety or just garden variety anxiety, depression, and whatever. We talk a lot about lifestyle kinds of things to get the mind and body working in synergy more effectively. And in fact, the name of my company is Synergy Neurofeedback and Counseling. That's the name of my company. And that's on purpose, because the idea is we want all of these things working synergistically with each other, feeding each other, supporting each other. So yeah, beta blockers are an option. And if they are an option for you, then, rock on. I'm glad you find something that works for you. Some ways that I will advocate with people are ways that will allow us to calm that trait anxiety, calm that baseline arousal state. Because what I think that does, Heidi, is it doesn't then preclude us from going into those Mahler 1 moments when the time is right. But it also keeps us kind of out of that, mental spin cycle where we start telling stories and predicting our own demise and worry and fear and all those things. It kind of keeps us out of that without precluding us from going into the amazing moments when it's time. So some of the things that I advocate, I think a basic meditation practice can be really useful on so many levels. There's a flutist, I can't remember who, you probably know, who did a lot of work in body mapping.
Lee Pearson?
I guess it was about 10 or 12 years. I guess. I don't remember. I don't remember the name, but I know that's been, a discussion in the flute world. And I think connected to that work a little bit. I mean, for example, on my website, people can download for free a little 5-minute body scan meditation that you can just get totally for free. And it basically takes you through some basic breathing where we sort of do a personal inventory of what's going on in our own bodies. And I think the more we can learn to connect the breath with the mind and learning how to choose what we are picking up with and engaging cognitively. When we learn to do that, then things start to kind of work again more synergistically. So meditation is a great way to do that. I will tell you that often when I start talking about meditation with people, and Heidi, is it fair to say, there's always the question of are people with certain personalities drawn to certain instruments? Is it fair to say that maybe some flutists are a little tightly wound type A personality?
I think I don't want to. Yeah. I think it's safe to say that. I've had the pleasure of having some unwound up flute friends, so I'm very thankful for them, and I've learned a lot. But yeah, I think the trend is kind of I'm starting to see a lot of flutists get into this yoga realm, which is kind of interesting. Because I'm 34, and I feel like growing up, a lot of my friends are older. And then as I went back to school a little later in life, from 30 to 33 to get my doctorate, a lot of my friends ended up being younger. And so I got to see, both generations. And so I feel like maybe my generation and a little older. I don't want to stereotype, but I feel like they're more the type A. But then like my younger friends who are mid-20s, late 20s, I feel like that their world, they're getting into this yoga meditation thing more. But yeah, so I'm babbling, but my initial reaction was to say yes, but then I kind of thought about it a little bit more and I thought, wait a second, I'm starting to see a trend here. So yeah.
I know what you mean. And I think there may be a bit of a generational thing there that, when I was in school, which, I think my master's degree is technically printed on papyrus. And so it's been a while, but yeah, I think there's a generational thing that young adults now are embracing things like yoga and meditation more, which is something that I really recommend. And yoga is another one of those mind body kinds of things that I just think is terrific, because if you look at yoga or meditation, there are few activities that truly integrate mind and body and spirit all together. I mean, if you set those three things up in a triangle and you talk about different activities like talk therapy, well, that's really more of a mind, that's more of a cognitive and emotional thing. If you look at running or going to the gym, that's really very much a physical, but sometimes it can kind of calm the mind. But very few things really fully integrate mind, body, and spirit. And I think yoga and meditation are two that really do. And so I'm a huge advocate for those. We're actually really blessed here in Oklahoma City that one of the primary yoga teachers in town is a man named Ted Cox. And Ted is also the tuba player in the Oklahoma City Philharmonic. And Ted has been a yoga teacher for decades and is just an amazing leader in this community, both in the musical circles and in yoga circles. So that's kind of fun. We've got a neat resource here in Oklahoma City. And I've been grateful to Ted for kind of inspiring me with some of our lunchtime conversations. He's been a real influence. But Heidi, when I bring this up to people who've never done it before, I kind of get the deer in headlights look about meditation and about yoga. And so the thing I would say about yoga is it's easy to assume that because you can't automatically put your right knee in your left ear, that you have no excuse to, or you have no reason to be at yoga class, that you're afraid you're going to go there and everyone's going to have these amazing bodies and be able to do all these poses that we see on Instagram. And you're just going to be completely out of place and everyone's going to laugh at you. And again, that's the story we make up. But the truth is most yoga places I've been to are very accepting, and they're like, if you need to hang out in the back of the room and if you need to make a bunch of accommodations because you can't do a certain thing, the main thing you need to do is be present and do what you can do and let that be good enough. And so I love the message that happens, but a lot of times we don't assume that's the message before we go. So if you're considering going to yoga and you're scared of that, I just want to reassure people on that. And if you go to a class and you do feel judged, you do feel shamed, go find another one, because you probably just got really unlucky, because I'd say most places, they are in that acceptance of self, acceptance of others headspace. And so if you do find a place like that, then, there are plenty of others that you can go to. And then when I talk about meditation, I really get the deer in headlights look from people, because they just don't even know how to do that. And they say, I don't even know. I don't think I ever could clear my mind to where there's nothing going on in there. People are surprised to hear me say that's the way I teach it. That's not even the goal.
I was going to say, that's not the point.
Right.
Right? I mean,
but a lot of people, exactly. Well, the way I do it, and the way I think a lot of really great teachers teach it. Heidi, I don't even think the Zen masters completely clear their minds. I think they just get really good at catch and release. That when they're in that place and they're focused on the breath and they're noticing things going on in their own hearts, minds, and bodies, that they just get really good at noticing when they have grabbed onto a thought and are trying to wrestle it to the ground. They get better at noticing that and releasing it, and then not beating themselves up for that. And that's the key. And learning to be present in the moment. And, when you think about it, isn't that our goal as artists? Isn't that the goal of performance, to be fully present in the moment? That's really what we all strive for, is to just be wholly engrossed in whatever repertoire we're doing and whatever relationship we're forming with our audience. That's the goal. And so meditation is a beautiful way to practice becoming a more efficient performer. And there are a lot of ways that I think it makes us better. One is it makes us better at that catch and release because I don't know about you, Heidi, but there have been more than a million times that I've been in performance and I'm playing whatever piece and I find myself having this kind of parallel conversation with myself, having nothing to do with the music. And I just have to tell myself, shut up, quit, stop. And, Barry Green kind of rocked all our worlds back in 1986 with the inner game of music, right? One of the primary messages was quit talking to yourself when you play. And I know a lot of quotes get misattributed, but the quote that I've heard attributed to Gunther Schuller is that you can't make art and evaluate it at the same time. I don't know if Gunther Schuller actually said that or not, but I think it's true either way. So I think what meditation allows us to do is to practice that catch and release. And it allows us to practice not beating ourselves up when we do recognize that we've kind of caught onto something that maybe isn't as productive for us in the moment. There's a great book and another podcast that I can recommend. Dan Harris, he has a podcast called 10% Happier, and he has a book called Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics, which is amazing. And Dan Harris is a national broadcaster, and I guess several years ago had an anxiety attack on live national television, kind of melted down there in front of his national audience, and realized that he needed to find something, and it led him to meditation, and that's been hugely helpful. And so I think he's kind of brought meditation into the fidgety skeptics world in ways that a lot of us who maybe don't think we could do that can. So now I'm babbling. But so that's a book and a podcast that I can recommend. And I think his if not his first, then one of his very first few interviews on his podcast was the Dalai Lama. So no pressure, but and he had this beautiful interview with RuPaul, which is also amazing. So if you haven't heard that, then you should check it out. It's really great.
Very cool. So besides meditation and yoga, which are amazing, is there another approach out there? Like, I was going through this website, the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health's website, and they listed off a bunch of mind-body approaches, guided imagery, relaxation techniques such as breathing exercises, things like that. So I hear that you are a huge component of yoga and meditation, like you just mentioned. Are there other techniques that you really feel like integrate the mind, body, and spirit in a very well-balanced way?
Yes. And I think that the real answer is you've got to find what works for you. And so, and on the list you sent me, it included things like Tai Chi or Qigong, prayer. If that's your jam, then do it. I think that's, and there's a lot of psychological research out there that people of faith do tend to be more resilient a lot of the time. So I think whether it's meditation, prayer, I think whatever helps you reduce tension in the body, because again, the body reacts first. Okay. And so when we can reduce tension in the body, I think the mind will follow. So meditation, I have a chiropractor I love. And so if I catch myself in emotionally reactive space a little more than normal, often my chiropractor is my first call. And when he can kind of get my spine back into alignment in ways that I'm just walking better, I'm sitting better, I'm sleeping better, again, things kind of get into line there. I think whatever therapy you find useful, if you're a cognitive behavioral person and you feel like talking about your thoughts and actions is the way to calm your system, then that works for you. It's not the way I work, but it works for a lot of people. And so, and let me talk for just a second about neurofeedback. Okay. And I will say now, I'm biased. I think neurofeedback is the best thing most people haven't ever heard of. It's a form of biofeedback. And often if people haven't heard of neurofeedback, they've heard of biofeedback. But a lot of times people say, well, biofeedback, is that like the thing at the airport that you put the quarter in? And no, it's not that. The truth is we have the ability and have known for a long time that we can adapt our biological function through intentional mental work. And so biofeedback is a matter of creating a feedback loop where we can just get information. I mean, some real basic biofeedback devices are a thermometer or a lie detector test. A lie detector actually measures what's called galvanic skin response, the amount that your skin is conducting electricity, which is influenced by your sweat glands. And it also measures skin temperature in very, very precise ways. So again, a lie detector test is predicated on the idea that physiology precedes cognition. And so unless you're a psychopath, you can't tell a lie without your body responding to that stress of telling the lie before you tell it. Now, if you're a psychopath, that's another conversation. But, so this idea that the body responds first, I think, is important for us. But we can also reverse engineer that. And so we can create a feedback loop where we can show the brain what the body's doing, and then we can teach you how to make adjustments. So we can do that with the variability of our heart rate. See, our heart rate is not supposed to be a metronome. It's supposed to speed up when we breathe in. It's supposed to decrease when we exhale. And what we find is that people with higher heart rate variability tend to be more physically fit and emotionally resilient. People with lower variability in the heart rate tend to be less of those things. And so an Olympic swimmer who has great relationships and has done a lot of their own therapy probably has really great heart rate variability. Schizophrenics tend to not be very healthy and not be very resilient. And so tends to be a little more straight line. And in my own clinic, what I've done is I've worked people through heart rate variability work where we work on breathing, and then they begin to understand the connection between breathing and heart rate. And you can show them just on the screen how their heart rate and their breathing then begin to align. The variability of the heart rate increases, and they feel more relaxed and calm. So biofeedback or neurofeedback. Neurofeedback is simply doing biofeedback on brainwaves. So we know that delta, theta, alpha, and beta waves occur in the brain all over the cortex in different proportions and amounts, depending on the part of the brain we're talking about. And we know that we can teach the brain how to change those brainwave patterns. And it can have huge implications for us in terms of just managing our lives. A lot of people who find me for neurofeedback are parents with kids who have ADHD, and they don't want to put them on stimulants. And through 30 neurofeedback sessions, the average improvement for a kid in my clinic is they usually have about a 40% improvement in attention and impulsivity ratings, not being on medications, which usually results in some pretty significant life changes for them. So you may not realize that, but there's probably a neurofeedback provider near you, even in Greece, I bet. But neurofeedback is a way that we can teach the brain, or biofeedback is a way that we can teach the body to lower that baseline arousal state. And then the flip side of that is then to reach the highest level of the higher levels of arousal that we need when the antelope shows up on our radar, right? And so being a great performer is not just about being calm. Being a great performer is also about getting into that heightened arousal state when we hit those Mahler 1 moments. Right? So it's not just about remaining calm. It's about being calm when it calls for it, and being intense and not hyper aroused, but high levels of arousal when it's time. So yeah, biofeedback, neurofeedback. There's a really great biofeedback device that you can actually buy and do. You don't even need a clinician. It's called a heart math device. They're not cheap. They're about, I don't know, $130, $140, but it'll actually interface with your smartphone. And it's actually pretty effective. They're pretty good about getting people through just the breathing exercises. And heart math actually uses kind of a variation on heart rate variability, which is fine. I think clinically it's entirely appropriate. It's not pure heart rate variability. It's another thing we call coherence, but it's really useful. And for $130, I mean, if it's something that can really kind of get you into that appropriate state, that's money well spent. And Heidi, what I'll do is on my website, I will put links to all of these things. People can go in and like a lot of these books that I'm recommending. I'll do a blog post on my website about a recommended reading list. And so if people want to see a lot of the books that I recommend to people, they can just go to my website at chrisneal.com and check that out if they want. And so I don't know if you're willing to link that from your page or not, but we'll
for sure. For them. That'd be great. I usually do show note links, so I will put it at the base great. So that way the listeners can click and make it super easy.
Great. Thanks for that. So I think the bottom line, Heidi, is whatever works for you. And so if that's cognitive behavioral therapy, if that's beta blockers, there are some supplements that actually some people have gotten some benefit from. And I'll put links to some of these studies. Again, I'm not really recommending them to people only because I'm not qualified to make those recommendations, but I can certainly tell people they're out there and they can make their own choices. There's some supplements. There's a couple of amino acids that when used independently or in combination with others have been really useful. L-theanine is one that actually I found really useful myself. There's one L-arginine and L-lysine when used in combination, also sometimes in combination with passion flower. Those passion flowers, not an amino acid, it's just a supplement. And you can buy all these things over the counter. They're not hard to get in most places. And I've used that kind of 3-pronged supplement stack as well, and have had some really good benefit. It's done really well just for my baseline anxiety levels as well. I find that I'm much less reactive. I sleep better. I'm much more focused. Some people really like to use magnesium as a supplement. The other thing I'll say, Heidi, that I think the absolute best thing that you can do to lower trait anxiety, lower your baseline arousal, is get a good night's sleep. I think I think there is a deep connection in ways that we're just beginning to understand about the connection between sleep and anxiety, and sleep and just our basic functioning as people. And most of us are under-rested, we're underfed in terms of good food. And so I think the best thing you can do, honestly, to cut to the chase, is all of these lifestyle things that we hear about: sleep, diet, exercise, relationships. So when we can, mind, body, spirit, relationships, and then tending to the brain. I think also sometimes with the brain, I think sometimes we underestimate how well the brain responds to good, healthy fats. So I think nutritionally, things like, a lot of those Mediterranean diet kinds of things, good, healthy avocados, olive oil, nuts. I'm a big advocate for Bulletproof Coffee. Have you heard of this?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I'm drinking some now, as a matter of fact. And so Bulletproof Coffee, which uses MCT oil, that has maybe been one of the most profound things that I've done in my own journey. It helps concentration and focus, which then kind of lowers my anxiety levels. So that's kind of a hodgepodge. I'm just kind of rapid fire a lot of these things, but I think anything that helps you sleep better, anything that helps you lower that baseline arousal, and I'll put up some links to some of these studies, and people can see if any of those things are useful for them. There are some supplement stacks that I think some people use and I have experimented with. The last one I'll mention, and it's not really a lowering of anxiety thing, but it is kind of a improving mental focus thing that I think can still help us a lot, is a nootropic. Are you familiar with that term, nootropic?
I am not.
Okay. So a nootropic is basically a supplement that's supposed to improve concentration and cognitive functioning. So it's not a medicine like, Vyvanse or something. It's something that's a little more natural. And there are a lot of them out there, and there's a lot of good research on nootropics. And again, those are usually over-the-counter kinds of things that you can try. It's kind of, your mileage may vary. I have some that I like. I'll put those on my website and talk about why. The thing that I will mention about supplements here in the United States is that, and I hope it's a little different, but in the U.S., there's not really a very good regulation of the supplement industry. And so there's a lot of, and put this in air quotes, proprietary blends where you don't even really know what you're getting or how much. And there's some companies that I know that are actually a lot more open source about that. And in Europe, I think there might be some better protections on that. And I'm sure you have some listeners in other countries as well. I'll put links to those in that article, and then people can then just do their own research. But nootropics are really great for mental focus and clarity, which I don't know about you, when I've got that, I'm certainly less anxious.
No, that's awesome. Thank you so much for all of those resources. That's great. I can't wait to see those links, and I know the listeners are going to benefit from that knowledge.
Great. Well, I'm happy to provide it.
Great. So thank you so much, Chris, for your knowledge in this field of performance anxiety and talking about the mind and body integration approaches. I so appreciate your time, energy, and talents. And is there any last final word or statement that you would like to say as the punchline? The
punchline. Two flutists walk into a bar. No.
Right. Yeah.
So I think, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's just, such an honor to be able to come on and talk about these things. I think there are two things that I'll mention. One, the less important one, is that I'm putting together some online course material that at least the first part of that I'll be offering for free. And so hopefully by the time you get this episode up and running, I'll have that on the website as well. And so I won't charge anything for that. And people can kind of get some basic fundamentals if they want. Hopefully I can, if it's not up there when you go to the website, then check back because I will get that posted. But the more important thing I guess I would say to people is I want to normalize this for people. It's easy to beat yourself up. It's easy to feel shame. It's easy to feel like you're less of a musician, less of an artist, less of a person if you struggle with these things. And that's just not true. More people struggle with this than you realize. And even if they don't talk about it, like you said, a lot of professionals don't talk about it because they don't want to be thought less of. And so I would say that if you struggle with these things, don't hesitate to reach out for help. And if you don't know where to reach out, feel free to email, and I will help you find resources in your community because there are resources everywhere. You just have to sometimes be persistent about finding them and be diligent about taking care of yourself in this, because that's really what it's all about.
Yes, it is so important. Great, Chris. Well, thank you so much. And we will say our goodbyes here. But for the listeners who are interested, we are going to talk now about the flow state. So don't miss Chris talking about that topic for next week. Today's sponsor is brought to you by J&K Productions. Did you know that not only are they a production company for podcasts, but they are a recording company for musicians? Any musical recording needs that you may have, J&K Productions can fulfill that need. They have all the necessary equipment and expertise to record your next flute recording for college or graduate auditions, competitions, summer festivals, or a flute album. J&K Productions can record any setup imaginable, from solo flute, small chamber, flute and piano, and much more. Consider J&K Productions for your next recording project. Contact them at jkproductions.media. Thank you for listening to the Flute 360 podcast. For more information, please visit HeidiKBegay.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review in the iTunes store. Let's talk about flute.